The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the dusty village square. A crowd had gathered, their murmurs mixing with the occasional harsh laugh. At the center stood a man named Baran, his face twisted into a scowl as he gripped the arms of his 5 daughters. The girls, ranging from a teenager to the youngest who could barely count her fingers, trembled in their threadbare dresses. Their names were Leora, Mara, Sela, Nia, and Tali, but in that moment, they were nothing more than property to the man who called himself their father. Baran's voice boomed over the crowd as he announced the auction. Fine, strong girls. Good for work, good for wives. Who will pay the highest price? His words were met with jeers and calculating stares from the villagers. Some men rubbed their chins, already imagining which girl they might claim. The sisters clung to each other, their eyes wide with terror. Leora, the eldest, tried to shield her younger siblings, but there was nowhere to run. Just as the first bids began, a stranger rode into the village on a sturdy horse. He was a tall man with a stern face, his clothes finely made but dusty from travel. This was Elder Cade, a merchant known in distant cities for his wealth and fairness. He had stopped only to restock his supplies, but the scene before him made his blood run cold. Cade dismounted and pushed through the crowd, his expression darkening with every step. He had seen suffering before, but the sight of children being sold like livestock filled him with a fury he could not contain. Without hesitation, he raised his voice above the noise. Enough! The crowd fell silent, turning to stare at the newcomer. Baran sneered. What do you want, rich man? If you're not here to bid, move along. Cade's jaw tightened. He reached into his belt and pulled out a heavy purse, tossing it at Baran's feet. The coins spilled into the dirt with a clatter. That is twice what these girls are worth. They leave with me now. Baran's eyes gleamed with greed as he snatched up the money, not caring about the daughters he had just sold. The villagers muttered in shock, but no one dared challenge Cade. The sisters, still trembling, looked up at the stranger with a mix of fear and desperate hope. Cade knelt before them, his voice softening. You are safe now, he said. No one will hurt you again. And with that, he led them away from the square, away from the life they had known, toward an uncertain future. The sisters did not know if they could trust this man, but anything was better than the fate they had narrowly escaped. Little did they know, this was the beginning of a new life, one they could never have imagined. The wagon wheels creaked as Elder Cade guided the horses away from the village square, leaving behind the jeering crowd and the stench of greed. The 5 sisters huddled together in the back, their thin arms wrapped around each other for warmth and comfort. Leora, the eldest at 15, kept her eyes locked on the stranger's back, her mind racing with suspicion. What does he want with us? The merchant's estate came into view as they crested a hill, a sprawling home of pale stone nestled among orchards and gardens, so unlike the cramped, dirt-floored hut they had shared with their father. A high wall surrounded the property, not to keep people in, but to shield them from the harshness of the world beyond. The younger sisters gasped, their fear momentarily forgotten at the sight of such grandeur. Lady Alara, Cade's wife, stood waiting at the gates. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled into a simple braid, and her hands, though lined with age, moved with gentle purpose as she rushed forward. The sisters flinched instinctively when she reached for them, but her touch was featherlight on Tali's grimy cheek. "Oh, my dears," she murmured, her voice thick with emotion. "Come inside. Let's get you warm." Inside, the house smelled of herbs and freshly baked bread. The sisters stood frozen in the entrance hall, their bare feet leaving dusty prints on the polished floor. They had never seen such cleanliness, such space. A servant approached with a tray of honeyed milk, but the girls shrank back, their stomachs too knotted with fear to accept food from strangers. Lady Alara understood. Without another word, she led them to a bathing chamber where steaming water waited in deep copper tubs. The sisters hesitated, clutching their ragged clothes. "No one will enter," Alara assured them. "Take your time. There are fresh garments on the bench." The moment the door closed, Leora rounded on her sisters. "Don't get comfortable," she whispered fiercely. "This could be a trick. Rich people don't help girls like us for nothing." But Mara, ever the dreamer, was already tracing her fingers over the embroidered towels. "What if it's not a trick?" she breathed. Meanwhile, in the courtyard, Cade's 5 sons Darian, Ryan, Jace, Torin, and Evander watched from the shadows of the colonnade. They had been summoned from their studies and chores to hear their father's grim tale of the auction. "Remember this," Cade told them, his voice low. "Strength is not in wealth or swords, but in how we treat those who have none." As night fell, the sisters were given soft beds in a shared chamber. Tali, the youngest at 6, curled into Leora's side. "Are they going to sell us tomorrow?" she whispered. Leora tightened her hold. "Not if I can help it." Outside their door, unseen, Lady Alara pressed a hand to her mouth and wept. Morning light spilled through the arched windows of the sisters' new chamber, painting golden stripes across the woven rugs. Leora awoke with a start, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar softness beneath her. For a heartbeat, she thought the auction had been a nightmare until she saw her sisters sleeping peacefully around her, their faces clean for the first time in memory. A quiet knock sounded at the door. Before Leora could respond, it opened to reveal a young maid bearing a tray of warm bread, goat cheese, and sliced apples. The aroma made Leora's stomach growl, but she clenched her jaw. "We don't need." "Lady Alara thought you might be hungry," the maid interrupted gently, setting the tray on a low table. "She asks that you join her in the herb garden when you're ready." She left before Leora could refuse. Mara was already reaching for the food. "It's not poisoned," she said around a mouthful of bread when Leora glared. "If they wanted us dead, they wouldn't have wasted the bathwater." The logic was sound, but Leora only allowed herself a single apple slice. She watched as Nia, always the restless one, paced the room, running calloused fingers along the carved bedposts. "This place is like a king's palace," Nia muttered. "Why would they give this to us?" Downstairs, the household buzzed with morning activity. In the sunlit courtyard, Ryan and Evander sparred with wooden practice swords, their movements sending up puffs of dust. They paused when 5 unfamiliar figures emerged from the house, led by a servant. "Those are father's charity cases?" Ryan whispered, wiping sweat from his brow. Evander elbowed him. "They're people, not cases." But even he couldn't help staring at the sisters, especially Sela, whose fingers twitched at her sides as if plucking invisible strings. The herb garden smelled of lavender and rosemary. Lady Alara knelt among the plants, her skirts pooled around her. She smiled when she saw the sisters, but didn't raise a small gesture that Leora noted with reluctant appreciation. The lady wasn't forcing them to approach. "Come," Alara said, patting the earth beside her. "I'll show you which plants heal fever and which ones sting like fire ants." To everyone's surprise, it was Tali who moved first. The child crouched next to Alara, her nose wrinkling at the sharp scent of crushed mint. "Our mother knew about plants," she said softly. Then, as if realizing she'd spoken forbidden words, she clapped her hands over her mouth. A shadow crossed Alara's face. "Your mother would be glad you're learning." She didn't press for more, though the question hung in the air, where was their mother now? That evening, as the sisters prepared for bed, Mara whispered excitedly about the library she'd glimpsed through an open door. "There must be 100 scrolls." "Books won't fill your belly," Leora snapped, but her heart wasn't in it. She'd seen the way Nia's eyes had lit up when the stable master offered to teach her archery, how Sela had hummed along with the minstrel playing in the courtyard. Tali's small voice pierced the darkness. "Leora, do you think maybe we could stay?" Leora turned her face to the wall so her sisters wouldn't see her tears. "Go to sleep." Outside, the first autumn wind rattled the shutters, carrying with it the scent of coming rain and something else, something foul moving through the night toward the estate. 3 weeks had woven the sisters into the rhythm of the estate like new threads in an old tapestry. Mara spent her mornings bent over scrolls in the library, her ink-stained fingers tracing words she was only beginning to understand. Nia trailed after the weapon's master, her calloused hands now familiar with the weight of a practiced sword. Even Leora had reluctantly accepted a basket of medicinal herbs from Lady Alara, though she still checked every meal for signs of tampering. The fragile peace shattered just after dawn on market day. A commotion at the outer gates sent chickens scattering. The sisters, who had been helping shell peas in the courtyard, froze at the sound of a voice that haunted their dreams. "Where are my daughters?" Baran's words slurred together, his breath reeking of cheap ale even across the distance. "Stolen from me by that thieving merchant." Leora's hands clenched around her knife. The blade, meant for trimming beans, suddenly felt like the only solid thing in a tilting world. Inside the main house, Elder Cade was already striding toward the disturbance, his face like storm-carved stone. His sons fell into step behind him, though Lady Alara caught Evander's sleeve. "Fetch the village magistrate," she murmured. Quietly. At the gates, Baran swayed on his feet. His clothes were filthier than the sisters remembered, his beard matted with old food. When his bloodshot eyes landed on his daughters, he grinned, showing blackened teeth. "There's my girls. Come give your father his due." Tali whimpered and buried her face in Sela's skirts. Nia stepped forward, her body blocking the younger ones.
"You sold us," she spat.
"We owe you nothing." Baran's grin twisted into something ugly. He lunged, but Cade moved faster, intercepting him with an arm like an iron bar across his chest. "You are paid fair price," Cade said, his voice dangerously calm. "These children are under my protection now." "Protection?" Baran wheezed a laugh. "I know what rich men want with pretty girls. At least I was honest about it." Something inside Leora snapped. She surged forward, the knife flashing in her hand. "You drunken worm. You sold us to pay your gambling debts." "Mother would have." Cade caught her wrist mid-swing. Not harshly, but with a firmness that stilled her trembling. "No, child," he said softly. "Violence is what he understands. We'll show him justice instead." The magistrate arrived then, his polished boots kicking up dust. He took one look at Baran and sighed. Again? As the magistrate's guards dragged Baran away, his screams followed them like a curse. "You'll regret this. They're my blood. My property." Later, when the shaking had stopped and the younger sisters were asleep, Leora found Cade in his study. "He'll come back," she said flatly. Cade set aside his ledger. "Probably. And when he does?" Moonlight through the window turned Cade's silver hair to mercury. "Then we'll face him together. But understand this, Leora, real freedom isn't the absence of fear. It's having people who'll stand beside you when fear comes knocking." For the first time since the auction, Leora let herself believe the words. The first frost painted the estate in crystalline lace the morning the sisters truly became part of the household. Baran's drunken threats had faded with the autumn leaves, though Leora still checked the door latch twice each night. Winter's arrival brought a hush over the land, but within the stone walls of the main house, warmth bloomed in unexpected ways. Mara discovered it first. She had taken to studying in the library each afternoon, curled like a contented cat near the hearth. One particularly bitter day, Ryan entered with an armful of scrolls, his nose red from the cold. Without a word, he spread them on the table beside her maps of distant lands, sea charts marked with mythical beasts, even a delicate drawing of the stars. "You've been staring at the same philosophy text for weeks," he said when she gaped at him. "Thought you might want something that doesn't make your eyes cross." Mara's laughter echoed off the vaulted ceiling. In the kitchens, Sela found her place, without realizing it. The cook, a gruff woman with hands like knotted oak, had shooed her away 3 times before noticing the girl humming while she scrubbed pots. By midwinter, Sela's melodies wove through the kitchen steam, and the cook began leaving sweet buns where Sela could steal them. Nia's transformation was more visible. Where she had once bristled at every offered kindness, she now stood shoulder to shoulder with Torin during weapons practice, their sparring matches drawing crowds of stable boys. When Torin presented her with a properly balanced dagger, not a practice blade, but real steel, she accepted it with a nod that meant more than tears. Only Leora held herself apart, though not for lack of trying on Evander's part. The quietest brother found excuses to pass her in the halls, once even bringing a wounded stable cat for her to heal. She fixed the animal's paw with deft fingers while Evander watched, his admiration plain. "You're staring," Leora muttered without looking up. Evander's ears turned pink. "It's just you're good at this." The thaw came unexpectedly. On the coldest night of the year, when the wind howled like a hungry wolf, Tali woke screaming from a nightmare. Before Leora could reach her, Lady Alara was there, gathering the sobbing child into her arms. "Shoo, little one," she murmured, rocking back and forth. "You're safe here." Leora stood frozen in the doorway, her throat tight. She had been mother to her sisters since their own had vanished into an unmarked grave. Watching Alara soothe Tali, something in her chest cracked open. Later, when the household slept, Leora crept to the kitchen and found Evander stealing honey cakes. Instead of scolding him, she took one for herself. They ate in silence, listening to the wind, two lonely souls no longer quite so alone. Spring came to the estate in a riot of cherry blossoms and birdsong. The sisters no longer startled at the sound of their own names, no longer measured portions as if each meal might be their last. Yet as the world outside awakened, so too did something unexpected within the walls of the great house, something fragile and sweet that none dared name aloud. It began with Mara and Ryan. Their shared love of books had turned into shared afternoons in the orchard, where Ryan read poetry aloud while Mara braided flower crowns. One evening, when the others had retired, Cade found them asleep beneath the oldest apple tree, Mara's head pillowed on Ryan's shoulder, their fingers loosely intertwined. He covered them with a blanket and said nothing, but his eyes shone in the moonlight. Nia and Torrent's courtship was anything but quiet. Their sparring matches grew more intense, the clash of wooden swords echoing across the training yard. What began as competition became a dance, one where Torrent would deliberately leave an opening for Nia to strike, and she would roll her eyes and refuse to take it. When she finally bested him fair and square, he kissed her sweaty brow in front of the entire household. To everyone's astonishment, Nia, who once broke a man's nose for grabbing her wrist, only flushed and shoved him into the horse trough. Sela and Evander found each other in music. He would transcribe the folk songs she hummed, adding harmonies that made her melodies soar. One rainy afternoon, Lady Alara entered the music room to find them forehead to forehead, whispering lyrics that rhymed forever with together. She backed out silently, her hand pressed to her smiling lips. Only Leora resisted the changing tides. She watched her sisters bloom like the spring flowers and told herself it was enough that they were safe. Then one evening, Darian found her in the healing room, grinding herbs with more force than necessary. "You'll pulverize the poor mint into nothing," he teased, leaning against the doorway. Leora scowled. "Shouldn't you be off managing estate accounts or whatever it is future lords do?" Instead of taking the bait, Darian moved closer. He picked up a sprig of lavender, twirling it between his fingers. "Father wants to make the betrothals official," he said quietly. "But only if all parties agree." The mortar slipped from Leora's hands, scattering dried leaves across the floor. She had known this day would come, had prepared speeches about gratitude not equaling obligation. But when she met Darian's steady gaze, the words died in her throat. "You think I don't see how you watch over everyone?" Darian continued. "How you still sleep with a dagger under your pillow?" He tucked the lavender behind her ear. "Let someone watch over you for once." The first tear surprised them both. That night, the five sisters gathered in their shared chamber as they hadn't in months. No one spoke of marriage or love. They simply sat in a circle, holding hands, remembering the girls they had been, and marveling at the women they'd become. Outside their window, the cherry petals fell like pink snow, covering the scars of winter with new beginnings. The morning of the weddings dawned clear and golden, as if the sky itself had decided to bless their union. The estate buzzed with activity. Servants hung garlands of late-blooming roses, cooks pulled steaming loaves from ovens, and musicians tuned their instruments in the courtyard. 5 brides dressed in ivory silk moved through the preparations like a single entity, their hands occasionally reaching out to brush against one another, as if to confirm this was not a dream. Leora stood before the polished bronze mirror, adjusting the delicate silver circlet Darian had gifted her. The woman staring back was nearly unrecognizable from the fierce, distrustful girl who had arrived at these gates. Her hands, once always clenched in readiness for a fight, now lay relaxed to her sides. "You look like a queen," Nia said, appearing behind her. She wore a simple gown but had refused to part with her dagger, which now hung in a jeweled sheath at her waist. Sela hummed a nervous melody while Mara recited love poetry under her breath. Little Tali, no longer so little at 12 years old, clutched a basket of petals with solemn excitement. "Do you think Mother sees us?" she whispered. The room stilled. It was the first time any of them had spoken of their birth mother since coming to the estate. Before Leora could answer, Lady Alara entered carrying 5 small velvet boxes. Inside each lay a pendant, a tiny silver blossom with a pearl at its center. "These were my mother's," she said, fastening one around Tali's neck. She believed pearls were made from happy tears wept by the moon. Her voice caught. "Today, you become my daughters twice over." The ceremony took place beneath the ancient oak at the heart of the estate. As the sisters walked toward their waiting grooms, the years fell away, the hunger, the fear, the cold nights in Baran's hut, until all that remained was this perfect moment. Cade stood before the gathered family, his usually stern face softened with emotion. "Some bonds are born of blood," he said, looking at each couple in turn. "But the strongest bonds are chosen every day, with every act of kindness, every shared joy, every forgiven hurt." When the vows were spoken and the 5 couples turned to face their future, even the servants wept. The feast lasted until the stars emerged, with music and laughter spilling into the gardens. As midnight approached, Leora found Cade watching the celebration from a quiet corner. "You saved us," she said simply.
He shook his head.
"I only gave you shelter. You saved yourselves." Years later, when travelers passed through the valley, they would speak of the prosperous estate where 5 remarkable sisters and their husbands had built something extraordinary. They would tell of Lady Mara's school for village children, of Nia's band of female guards, of Sela's songs that could make stone weep. They would marvel at how the family's kindness had transformed the region, making the old practice of selling daughters unthinkable. But on that wedding night, as the last lanterns guttered out and the new couples disappeared into the fragrant darkness, there were no grand stories yet to tell. Only the quiet certainty that from this night forward, no one would ever be alone again. The cherry tree in the courtyard, witness to so much joy, let fall a single petal onto the empty feast tables. Somewhere beyond the walls, the wind carried away the last echoes of Baran's curses, scattering them like dust. And the moon, as it had done every night since the world began, wept her happy tears into the sea.
The end.